They say the desert never sleeps. But what if I told you that somewhere beneath Arizona's burning sun, hidden in its forgotten small towns, something ancient still watches, something that doesn't want to be found? Welcome to Scary Dark Narrations, where reality bleeds into nightmare. And every story you'll hear tonight is disturbingly true. These aren't tales told around campfires or made-up ghost stories. No. These are real accounts from the dust-covered corners of Arizona, places that locals refuse to talk about after dark. In this video, 7 most disturbing true Arizona small-town horror stories will travel deep into eerie highways, abandoned motels, and ghost-ridden mining towns, each holding a secret darker than the desert night itself. You'll hear of vanished travelers, cursed lands, and whispers that echo through the canyons long after midnight. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't look out the window. Because once you begin 7 most disturbing true Arizona small-town horror stories, the desert won't let you leave easily. I grew up in Jerome, Arizona, a town that clings to the mountainside like it's afraid to fall. From my bedroom window, I could see the bones of the old mine spreading down the hill. Rusted metal and broken beams jutting from the earth like ribs from a carcass. People call Jerome America's most haunted ghost town. But to those of us who lived there, that word haunted never felt like a joke. It was more like a quiet truth that everyone chose to ignore. The streets were narrow and steep, twisting around weathered buildings that leaned toward each other as if whispering secrets. On summer nights, when the wind came down from the hills, it carried a strange sound, not quite a whistle, not quite a moan. My mother said it was just air pushing through the abandoned mine shafts, but I used to think it sounded like breathing. She worked as a housekeeper at the Jerome Grande Hotel, a massive white building perched high above town like a watchful sentinel. It had once been the United Verd Hospital, where miners were brought when accidents claimed their limbs, or worse. Everyone in Jerome knew the stories, the endless deaths, fires that tore through the town, and the man who was crushed beneath the elevator, Claude Harvey. They said he still wandered the basement where his blood stained the concrete so deeply it never came out. My mother believed it. She never liked talking about it, but one rule she made sure to repeat was this: never go down to the old basement morgue alone, especially at night. He's still looking, she told me once, her voice low, and if you get too close, he might start looking for you instead. When I turned 17, I got a job at the hotel. My mother helped me get in. I was saving money for college and needed the extra work. I started as a server in the restaurant that overlooked the valley, serving tourists who came for the ghost stories more than the food. I learned to tell those stories well: Claude's death, the nurses who vanished, the flickering lights that guided no one. I'd describe the elevator crushing him, the stains that wouldn't fade, the shadows seen moving in the corners of mirrors. I didn't believe a word of it. To me, it was just performance. The thrill of making strangers shiver before they went back to their safe hotel rooms. But over time, things started to happen that I couldn't explain. I'd lock up the dining room, only to find a chair pulled out again. Doors would open and close on their own. Once the elevator stopped between floors for no reason, the light flickering as if someone else had pressed the button. Other employees joked about it. They said the hotel had personality, but when they talked about the basement, their voices always dropped to a whisper. That place, the lowest level, had never been fully renovated. It still smelled of disinfectant and rust, and the walls were cracked from decades of settling. I avoided it completely, until one night, it was a slow Tuesday in December. Only a handful of guests remained after dinner. My coworker, Kendrick, leaned against the counter and grinned at me. "You tell all those stories about the basement?" she said, "but you've never actually been down there, have you?" I shrugged it off. "I don't need to. I've got imagination," she laughed. "Come on, I'll show you something real." I hesitated. My mother's warning echoed in the back of my head, but I didn't want to look scared, so I followed her. The elevator creaked as it descended, the metal groaning like it hated the weight. When the doors opened, a cold draft brushed against my face. The air smelled old, coppery, like pennies soaked in water. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by weak bulbs that buzzed every few seconds. Shadows filled the gaps between the lights, moving slightly as if they had breath. We walked past several doors until Kendrick stopped at one marked authorized personnel only. She pushed it open with a grin. Inside, the room looked untouched by time. Rusted gurneys leaned against the walls, and a cracked enamel sink hung crookedly from a pipe. Against one wall stood an embalming table, its metal surface dark with stains that never faded. "This is where they brought the bodies," she said softly. "That's where they laid Claude Harvey after they pulled him from the elevator shaft." Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. I stared at the table, and though I told myself it was just old rust, a part of me knew those stains were older than paint, older than the hotel itself. A sudden static burst came from Kendrick's radio, the night manager calling her upstairs. "Wait here," she said. "I'll be right back." The door closed behind her, and just like that, the silence thickened. I stood there alone, surrounded by shadows that felt heavier than air. My breath sounded too loud, bouncing off the walls. I tried to distract myself by looking through the old cabinets. Inside were dusty jars labeled in faded handwriting. Formaldehyde, phenol, alcohol. I picked one up, tilting it toward the weak light. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, echoing down the hallway outside. I froze. Each step grew louder until they stopped right outside the open doorway. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. For a second I thought maybe Kendrick had come back, until I realized the footsteps were too heavy. Too slow, I turned toward the doorway. And he was standing there, a man in work clothes, dark, soaked, tattered. His hands hung at his sides, twisted and broken, the skin stretched and torn as if the bones beneath had been shattered. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me, hollow, searching, relentless. My voice caught in my throat. He took one step forward. The air dropped to freezing. My breath came out in white puffs as I stumbled backward, the jar slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. I don't remember running. I just remember moving my body, acting before my mind caught up. I darted through the doorway, down the hallway, my shoes slapping against the concrete. Behind me, the echo of those footsteps followed, not fast, but steady, as if he knew I couldn't escape. The elevator doors finally appeared ahead. I slammed the button again and again until they opened. As they closed behind me, I glanced through the narrow gap and saw him standing at the end of the hallway, motionless, staring back. Then, silence swallowed everything. When the elevator doors opened again, I bolted out before they fully parted, lungs burning, every muscle trembling. Kendrick was waiting by the counter, her face pale when she saw me. "What happened to you?" she asked. I couldn't find words. I just shook my head, muttered that I was sick, and left before anyone could stop me. Driving down the mountain that night, the road twisted through darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they ached. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shape sitting in the back seat. There was nothing there, but I swear I could feel something like a weight in the car that wasn't mine. When I finally got home, my mother was asleep, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that the cold I'd felt in the basement was a draft, that the figure was a trick of the light. I almost convinced myself, till the footsteps started. The first night, I woke around 3 in the morning. I thought it was a dream, slow, heavy footsteps pacing the hallway outside my door. Back and forth, back and forth. When I finally sat up, the sound stopped. I opened the door, looked out into the darkness, and found nothing. But the smell hit me. Copper and decay. The exact smell from the basement. It happened again the next night, the next. My mother noticed I wasn't sleeping. She asked if something had happened at work. I told her the truth, every detail, every sound, every shadow. When I said his name, her face drained of color. "You went into the basement?" she whispered. I nodded. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. "No, you shouldn't have gone down there." I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't. "He's searching," she said. "He always has been. You must have caught his attention. How he thinks you can help him." I wanted to believe she was wrong, but over the next week, everything got worse. Objects in my room moved on their own, books sliding off shelves, doors creaking open when I was nowhere near them. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I'd see a dark shape standing behind me in the reflection of the window. My little brother started waking up screaming. He said a man with broken hands was standing at the foot of his bed. That was when my mother called a woman from Sedona, someone who, she said, knew how to deal with these kinds of things. I didn't believe in that kind of stuff, but I was desperate. When the woman arrived, she walked through every room in silence, her eyes half closed. Finally, she stopped in the hallway outside my bedroom and said softly, "He's not angry. He's lost. Something was taken from him and he can't move on until it's returned. What does he want?" I asked. She looked at me with pity. "You'll have to go back to where he died." My mother refused, but the activity kept escalating. One night, my window rattled violently, as if someone was pounding on it from the outside. Another night, I woke up to see muddy footprints on my bedroom floor, leading up to my bed and stopping just inches away. 3 weeks after that night in the basement, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove back to Jerome before dawn, the sky still the color of bruised steel. The hotel stood at the top of the hill, dark against the faint light. When I went inside, the night manager blinked at me in confusion. "You're not on shift," he said. "No," I told him. "I just need to go downstairs one last time." He hesitated but handed me the key. Maybe he saw something in my face that told him not to ask. The elevator creaked as it descended, the same groan, the same metallic sigh. The doors opened into that familiar dim hallway. Nothing had changed. The bulbs still flickered, the air still thick with that same smell, copper rot and something colder underneath. I walked to the end of the corridor, my footsteps echoing softly. The embalming room looked smaller now, emptier somehow. I whispered into the silence, "Claude, I'm sorry." My voice shook. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I just want this to stop. I want you to rest." The air grew colder. For a second, I thought I heard faint breathing, not mine. I looked around, and that's when I saw it, something glinting under the table. I crouched and reached into the shadows. My fingers closed around a small metal ring. It was a wedding band, tarnished and bent, the engraving inside barely visible. But I could make out the initials CH and a date from 1934, less than a year before he died. I set the ring on top of the table. "This is yours, isn't it?" I whispered. The silence deepened. Then, for just a moment, the air seemed to lift, lighter, warmer, almost peaceful. The faint scent of copper faded, and then nothing. I drove home as the sun rose over the valley. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. The footsteps never came again. The smell never returned. My brother slept peacefully. My mother never mentioned it again, but I could tell she knew. Something had changed. Months later, I heard that during renovations, the hotel staff found a wedding ring in the basement. They placed it in a glass display case in the lobby with a small plaque. Artifact from the original United Verde Hospital, circa 1930s. Every time I think of that, a chill runs through me. Maybe he finally found what he'd been searching for. Or maybe he's still down there, standing in the dark, staring at that ring through the glass, watching anyone who dares to come too close. I'll never go back to Jerome, because some places don't forget, and some spirits never stop searching. Would you dare return to that place? When the elevator doors opened again, I bolted out before they fully parted, lungs burning, every muscle trembling. Kendrick was waiting by the counter, her face pale when she saw me. "What happened to you?" she asked. I couldn't find words. I just shook my head, muttered that I was sick, and left before anyone could stop me. Driving down the mountain that night, the road twisted through darkness. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they ached. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shape sitting in the back seat. There was nothing there, but I swear I could feel something like a weight in the car that wasn't mine. When I finally got home, my mother was asleep, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that the cold I'd felt in the basement was a draft, that the figure was a trick of the light. I almost convinced myself, till the footsteps started. The first night, I woke around 3 in the morning. I thought it was a dream, slow, heavy footsteps pacing the hallway outside my door. Back and forth, back and forth. When I finally sat up, the sound stopped. I opened the door, looked out into the darkness, and found nothing. But the smell hit me. Copper and decay. The exact smell from the basement. It happened again the next night, the next. My mother noticed I wasn't sleeping. She asked if something had happened at work. I told her the truth, every detail, every sound, every shadow. When I said his name, her face drained of color. "You went into the basement?" she whispered. I nodded. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. "No, you shouldn't have gone down there." I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't. "He's searching," she said. "He always has been. You must have caught his attention. How he thinks you can help him." I wanted to believe she was wrong, but over the next week, everything got worse. Objects in my room moved on their own, books sliding off shelves, doors creaking open when I was nowhere near them. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I'd see a dark shape standing behind me in the reflection of the window. My little brother started waking up screaming. He said a man with broken hands was standing at the foot of his bed. That was when my mother called a woman from Sedona, someone who, she said, knew how to deal with these kinds of things. I didn't believe in that kind of stuff, but I was desperate. When the woman arrived, she walked through every room in silence, her eyes half closed. Finally, she stopped in the hallway outside my bedroom and said softly, "He's not angry. He's lost. Something was taken from him and he can't move on until it's returned. What does he want?" I asked. She looked at me with pity. "You'll have to go back to where he died." My mother refused, but the activity kept escalating. One night, my window rattled violently, as if someone was pounding on it from the outside. Another night, I woke up to see muddy footprints on my bedroom floor, leading up to my bed and stopping just inches away. 3 weeks after that night in the basement, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove back to Jerome before dawn, the sky still the color of bruised steel. The hotel stood at the top of the hill, dark against the faint light. When I went inside, the night manager blinked at me in confusion. "You're not on shift," he said. "No," I told him. "I just need to go downstairs one last time." He hesitated but handed me the key. Maybe he saw something in my face that told him not to ask. The elevator creaked as it descended, the same groan, the same metallic sigh. The doors opened into that familiar dim hallway. Nothing had changed. The bulbs still flickered, the air still thick with that same smell, copper rot and something colder underneath. I walked to the end of the corridor, my footsteps echoing softly. The embalming room looked smaller now, emptier somehow. I whispered into the silence, "Claude, I'm sorry." My voice shook. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I just want this to stop. I want you to rest." The air grew colder. For a second, I thought I heard faint breathing, not mine. I looked around, and that's when I saw it, something glinting under the table. I crouched and reached into the shadows. My fingers closed around a small metal ring. It was a wedding band, tarnished and bent, the engraving inside barely visible. But I could make out the initials CH and a date from 1934, less than a year before he died. I set the ring on top of the table. "This is yours, isn't it?" I whispered. The silence deepened. Then, for just a moment, the air seemed to lift, lighter, warmer, almost peaceful. The faint scent of copper faded, and then nothing. I drove home as the sun rose over the valley. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet. The footsteps never came again. The smell never returned. My brother slept peacefully. My mother never mentioned it again, but I could tell she knew. Something had changed. Months later, I heard that during renovations, the hotel staff found a wedding ring in the basement. They placed it in a glass display case in the lobby with a small plaque. Artifact from the original United Verde Hospital, circa 1930s. Every time I think of that, a chill runs through me. Maybe he finally found what he'd been searching for. Or maybe he's still down there, standing in the dark, staring at that ring through the glass, watching anyone who dares to come too close. I'll never go back to Jerome, because some places don't forget, and some spirits never stop searching. Would you dare return to that place? The desert air that morning felt heavier than usual dry. Metallic, like the ground itself, was warning us to turn back. I remember tightening the straps on my backpack and glancing at Talon, who was already staring at the rusted gates of the Vulture mine with a strange gleam in his eyes. It wasn't excitement anymore. It was something else, something darker. There were 4 of us that day, Me, my best friend Jacine, Indiana, and Talon. We'd been exploring ghost towns for years, always chasing the next thrill. But Talon's obsession with the Vulture mine had grown beyond reason. He talked about it constantly, studying old maps, reading miners' journals, whispering about hidden veins of gold that no one had ever claimed. At first, we laughed it off, but by October, none of us were laughing anymore. The mine loomed ahead, a patchwork of collapsed buildings and rusted machinery. A single dead tree rose from the earth near the main shaft, its gnarled limbs stretching skyward like skeletal fingers. They called it the hanging tree. 18 men had swung from it, accused of stealing gold. I caught Talon standing under it, eyes locked on the branch where the nooses once hung. He whispered something I couldn't make out and smiled faintly. By noon, the sun was burning overhead. We slipped through a gap in the fence and began exploring the eastern tunnels. The temperature dropped the moment we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of rot. Our flashlights cut thin beams through the darkness, illuminating jagged walls that glistened like they were sweating. Talon led us deeper, his confidence unshakable. He said he knew the layout, that the right-hand passage would lead us toward a forgotten section rich with ore. I didn't argue, though my stomach churned with unease. About 30 feet in, Jacine stopped suddenly and pointed her light at the ground. Fresh footprints. Boot prints, not ours, leading deeper into the tunnel, but none returning. Indiana cursed softly. "Someone's been living in here," he muttered. And he was right. 20 feet later, we found a sleeping bag, empty water bottles, and scraps of old clothing. It looked abandoned, but not for long. The dust around it was disturbed, like someone had left in a hurry. Jacine wanted to leave immediately. Indiana agreed. But Talon refused. His face had that same distant look again, pupils wide, lips trembling with something close to reverence. "It's close," he said. "The gold, they hid it here." I told him we'd check the next chamber and then leave. He nodded reluctantly, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else, buried deep beneath the rock. The tunnel widened into a small chamber, walls carved with the marks of picks and drills. A rusted lantern leaned against the wall beside a pile of tattered rags. And there, half buried in the dust, was a pickaxe. Its handle was smooth from years of use, and for a moment, I thought it looked wet, like someone had just set it down. Talon picked it up, turning it in his hands, testing the weight. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They were here," he murmured. "The miners. They never left." Indiana tried to make a joke, but his voice shook. The chamber felt smaller suddenly, the air thinner. I could hear the soft crumble of dust falling from above, the faint echo of our breaths overlapping. Then Talon froze. He turned toward us with eyes I didn't recognize, wild, dilated, as if reflecting something none of us could see. "The mine told me," he said quietly. "The gold is still here. And it needs to be protected." His words sent a chill down my spine. I started to say something, but before I could, he swung the pickaxe. The sound of it connecting with bone was sharp and final. Indiana's scream echoed down the tunnel, a sound that didn't sound human anymore. Jacine shouted his name, but it was swallowed by chaos. The tunnel, the darkness, the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. We ran. We didn't look back. The tunnel walls blurred as our flashlights flickered and swung wildly. Behind us, Talon's voice echoed, calling us thieves, betrayers, intruders. Indiana's screams faded into silence, then nothing. We burst out into the sunlight, gasping, blinded, shaking. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but it didn't feel like escape. Jacine grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "We can't leave him," she said. "We have to go back." I stared at the tunnel entrance, the yawning black hole in the rock. My throat tightened. I wanted to be brave, but something inside me whispered that Indiana was already gone. And then silence swallowed everything. We hid behind the ruins of an old workshop, hearts pounding so hard it hurt to breathe. The mine entrance was quiet now, but I could still see shadows shifting inside. My hands shook as I tried to get a signal on my phone, but the screen mocked me no service. Jacine crouched beside me, eyes fixed on the tunnel. "What if he comes out?" she whispered. Minutes passed, maybe 20. Then Talon emerged, walking into the sunlight like a man waking from a dream. His shirt was soaked in blood. The pickaxe hung loosely in his hand. He didn't look at us. He just turned toward the hanging tree and started walking. That image still haunts me, the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like he wasn't fully there. Jacine whispered that we needed to run, and we did. We reached the car, hands trembling so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and we tore down the dirt road, bouncing over stones, the mine shrinking behind us until it vanished into the desert haze. By the time we reached the highway, my phone buzzed back to life. We called 911. The police met us in Wickenburg, and hours later they found Talon sitting beneath the hanging tree. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. Just stared at the horizon with empty eyes. Indiana was found deeper in the tunnel. Pickaxe had gone straight through his shoulder, puncturing a lung. The officers said it must have been quick. I wanted to believe that. During the investigation, I told them everything: the sleeping bag, the footprints, the gear someone had left behind. But when the police searched, it was gone. No sign of anyone ever living there. No tracks, no belongings, nothing. It was as if the mine itself had swallowed the evidence whole. Months passed. Talon was declared mentally unfit and sent to a psychiatric facility. They said he had a psychotic break, triggered by stress and obsession. But that explanation never sat right with me. Talon wasn't crazy, at least he hadn't been. Something changed in that tunnel. Something spoke to him. I tried to move on, but the mind followed Min dreams in silence. In the way my phone still picks up static when I drive through the desert near Wickenburg. Sometimes I swear I can hear faint whispers in the static, like the echo of a pick striking stone. One night, about a year later, I got a call from Jacine. It was the first time she'd reached out since she moved to Colorado. Her voice was hollow. She said she'd been having dreams of the hanging tree, of Talon's eyes, of a voice whispering from underground. "It keeps saying my name," she told me. "It wants me to come back." I wanted to tell her it wasn't real, that it was just trauma replaying itself. But before I could, the line went dead. I called back. No answer. I haven't heard from her since. Every October, I drive past the dirt road that leads to Vulture mine. I tell myself not to look, not to remember. But every time, I feel it, that pull. It's the same hunger that once consumed Talon. Sometimes I think about going back just to see, just to understand. But then I remember what he said in that tunnel. The mind told me. And I wonder if the mind really does whisper. Who is it whispering to now? Would you dare to find out? The first time I felt her presence, the air in the upstairs hall changed. Thick, heavy, almost electric. I'd been closing up after a long shift at Casey Moore's, a historic restaurant tucked away in Tempe, Arizona. The laughter of the last patrons still echoed faintly in my head when I heard something faint upstairs. Like someone whispering through water. First I thought it was the pipes again. But then, a soft tap echoed from the second-floor hallway. Steady, deliberate. I froze near the old staircase, my hand on the banister worn smooth by decades of use. It was 2:30 a.m., and everyone had gone home except Kendricks, the assistant manager, who'd been spending more and more nights here alone. He claimed the ghost of Elizabeth Harmana, woman murdered in the building over a century ago, was trying to communicate. The rest of us thought he was losing sleep. Or maybe just his mind. Still, there was something unsettling about the way the shadows seemed to bend around that old staircase at night. The air upstairs always smelled faintly of perfume, something floral but faded, like lilies left too long in a vase. Kendricks told us he'd seen her reflection in the window one night. A woman in a white dress, standing perfectly still, her head slightly tilted as though listening. He said she wanted justice. Over the next week, things began to happen more frequently. Dishes slid across counters. Chairs shifted when no one was near. And every time the staff tried to joke about it, the lights flickered as if the building itself disapproved. I wanted to believe it was just bad wiring, but the look in Kendrick's eyes said otherwise. He'd started bringing a journal to work, recording every incident, like he was documenting something sacred. One evening, as we were closing, he stopped me by the bar. His voice trembled. "She's pointing, man. Always pointing at the same wall upstairs." I didn't know what to say. It She's trying to tell you something, I muttered, half joking, but Kendricks didn't laugh. He spent every night after that sitting in the old rooms upstairs, the lights dim, waiting for something to happen. Dallin, our manager, told him to stop, said he was provoking whatever haunted that place. But Kendricks just shook his head. She deserves peace, he said. And I think she's showing me how to find it. 2 weeks later, everything escalated. Glasses shattered without warning. Heavy footsteps crossed empty floors. Sometimes we'd hear the faint sound of someone humming a woman's voice, echoing from nowhere. Then came the night the temperature dropped so suddenly, our breath clouded in the air. Kendricks ran down the stairs, pale and shaking. She's pointing again, he whispered. At the wall. I swear there's something behind it. Dallin agreed to let him open the wall during upcoming renovations, mostly to shut him up. The deal was simple. If he found nothing, he'd pay for the repairs himself. The following Monday, the restaurant was closed, and the 5 of us gathered upstairs. The air was still, but it felt charged, as if the whole building was waiting. Kendricks took a hammer, knelt near the faded wallpaper, and struck. Each hit echoed through the empty halls like a heartbeat. Plaster cracked, dust filled the air, and for a moment, I thought I heard something faint, like a sigh escaping the wall itself. Then he found it. A small metal box, rusted and dented, wedged between the studs. He pulled it out carefully, his hands trembling. We took it downstairs, the silence stretching heavy between us. Kendricks pried the lid open with the back of a screwdriver, revealing stacks of old letters, yellowed paper, delicate ink. Love letters, each one signed by a man named Thomas Ridley. There were dozens of them, spanning years. The words were tender, desperate, and then possessive, obsessive. At the bottom lay a newer sheet of paper, folded cleanly, untouched by time. Kendricks unfolded it slowly, and we read it together under the dim bar light. It was a confession. Thomas Ridley admitted to killing Elizabeth Harmon in 1913. He described climbing through her window, arguing when she ended their engagement, and strangling her when she refused to take him back. He wrote that he would leave Arizona forever, unable to live with his guilt. It ended with a plea make, "Sure Elizabeth is remembered." Then, silence swallowed everything. No one spoke for what felt like a full minute. The air around us was still, but every instinct screamed that we weren't alone. Kendricks clutched the letter like it might vanish if he let go. "She wanted this found," he said softly. "She's been trying to tell us." We brought the confession to the police the next morning. There wasn't much they could do. The case was over a century old, but they confirmed the story matched an unsolved local murder from 1913. The document was archived, officially marking Elizabeth's story as real history, not just a ghost tale whispered by waitstaff. For a brief time, the restaurant was calm. The air didn't feel as heavy. The lights stopped flickering. Even the old upstairs rooms felt lighter. But then, a strange thing began happening. Staff started seeing her again, not frantic or angry, but quiet, peaceful. She would appear in the upstairs windows at closing time, looking out toward the street, her face pale and calm. Sometimes her reflection lingered even when no one stood there. And once, I saw her shadow glide across the hallway wall, slow and graceful, like a memory that refused to fade. Kendricks quit not long after. He said he'd done what she asked, but the place still haunted him. Every sound reminded him of her, every whisper of air, every creak in the floorboards. "She's not angry anymore," he told me one night, "but she's still there." I couldn't blame him. It's that building held her story like a scar, healed, but never forgotten. A few months later, I graduated and moved to California. My last night at Casey Moore's, I walked upstairs one final time. The air felt still, almost reverent. The section of wall we'd opened had been repaired, but I could still see faint lines where new plaster met old. I stood there in the quiet, half expecting to see her standing beside me. And then I did. Just for an instant. Reflected in the window, Elizabeth, her white dress faintly glowing in the moonlight. Her expression wasn't sad this time. It was grateful. Turned around, but she was gone. Only the faint scent of lilies lingered. As I descended the stairs, the old floorboards creaked behind me one by one, as though someone was walking in step. When I reached the bottom, everything went silent again, the kind of silence that hums deep in your ears. Sometimes I wonder what would VE happened if Kendricks had listened to her if. We'd ignored those signs. Dismissed her as just another ghost story. Would the haunting have grown darker? More desperate? Or would she have simply faded her story untold forever? Even now, years later, I still think about that night, the way the confession felt in my hands. The way the air changed once her truth was known. I think about how many other voices might be out there, trapped between silence and remembrance, waiting for someone willing to listen. Because maybe that's what ghosts really are. Not monsters, not curses, just memories that refuse to die until someone finally believes them. Would you dare return to this place? The desert always felt safe to me, wide, open, and honest. It never pretended to be anything but what it was: endless dust. Scattered pines and wind that carried secrets too old for people like us. My brother and I had been visiting that same hidden spot north of Flagstaff for months. Between two low hills, under a sky so clear it made you feel small, it became our ritual after work drive 40 minutes on those washboard roads, park the truck, sit on that flat rock, and let the night take over. That evening in late August felt no different. We had finished our landscaping job, hands raw from the tools, shirts stained with dust. The air was still warm when we left town, the sun dipping below the horizon as if it were retreating from something. My brother drove, as always, because I couldn't trust myself to navigate those roads after dark. The headlights carved tunnels through the desert, illuminating dust devils that danced across the road and vanished. We arrived at our spot around 8:15. The sky had deepened into that endless desert blue-black, and the stars were waking up, bright and sharp like shards of glass. My brother parked the truck facing the way we came. He always did that, said it made him feel better knowing we could leave fast if needed. I didn't question it. Out there, instincts mattered. The air was cool, brushing against my skin with that dry chill you only get at high elevations. Coyotes were calling somewhere in the distance, their voices echoing between the hills. Crickets, nightbirds, the soft hum of the wind. It all blended into the kind of natural symphony that becomes background after a while. It was home in its own strange way. He sat on the rock, rolling a joint, while I leaned back and watched the sky. We talked about moving Phoenix, maybe better jobs, better pay. Nothing deep. It's just the kind of talk you have when you trying to ignore how uncertain your future is. Then, something happened that I can still feel in my bones. It was 8:32. I know because I checked my watch, seconds before the world stopped. The sound died. All of it. Instantly. Not fading, not softening. It was as if someone had taken a blade and sliced through every frequency around us. Coyotes cut off mid-howl, the wind gone, even the trees stood unnaturally still. The silence was so thick it pressed against my eardrums. I could hear my heartbeat, slow and heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. My brother froze. He looked up from what he was doing, eyes wide but not panicked, just confused. He asked if I heard that, but his voice sounded strange, flat and muffled, like it was being swallowed by the air itself. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. The desert had never been silent before. Ever. Then came the tone, pitched, piercing like tinnitus, but alive. It wasn't coming through my ears. It was inside my head, drilling through my thoughts. I winced and covered my ears anyway, out of instinct. But it made no difference. The sound was everywhere and nowhere. My brother did the same, grimacing, his teeth clenched. Then he grabbed my arm hard. His nails bit into my skin. His eyes were fixed on the hill to our left. I turned slowly. At first I saw nothing but the outline of rock and scrub against the dark sky. But his breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. I whispered his name, but he didn't respond. He just said, "We need to go." Now, his voice was shaking. That was what made me move. My brother never sounded scared. Not once in his life. He started for the truck, walking fast, almost tripping over the uneven ground. I kept glancing at him, then at the hill, trying to see what he saw. I caught only a glimpse, something massive, darker than the night around it, standing still at the hill's crest. Humanoid, but stretched wrong, like someone had taken a human silhouette and distorted it. I blinked, and it was gone, or maybe it just blended into the dark. My chest tightened. We reached the truck. My brother jumped in, slamming the door so hard it rattled. The engine roared to life, and he floored it, tires spitting dirt as we tore down that narrow road. The truck bounced violently over the ruts, and I gripped the door handle, watching the rearview mirror as dust swallowed our trail. The tone began to fade. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, the desert came alive again. Crickets, wind, coyotes, all back in chorus, like nothing had happened. Like the night had simply paused. Then silence swallowed everything. My brother didn't stop until we hit the paved highway. Even then, he kept driving fast, 20 miles over the limit, white-knuckled on the wheel. His jaw was tight, his face pale under the dashboard glow. I kept asking him what he saw, but he didn't answer. We made it home just after 9. He went straight to his room without a word. I sat there for an hour, staring at the wall, feeling the silence from the desert still lingering in my skull. Around midnight, I knocked on his door. He said to come in. I was sitting on the bed with every light on. He looked hollow, like something had been drained from him. I sat beside him and asked again, "What did you see?" He took a long breath before answering. His voice trembled when he said, "It was watching us." He told me he felt it before he saw it, that deep, primal fear that tells you something is near, something that sees you as prey. Then he saw it on top of the hill. Said it was at least 9 feet tall, humanoid but wrong. Arms too long, head too big, shoulders hunched like it wasn't meant to stand upright. It didn't move. It just stood there, looking down at us, completely still. He said the air around it felt heavy, like it was pushing on his chest. And he knew with absolute certainty that if we didn't leave right then, something terrible would happen. That's why he grabbed me. That's why he didn't speak until we were far away. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear, maybe shadows, maybe exhaustion playing tricks. But he shook his head. He said he watched it shift its weight, its head turning to follow us. Not an illusion, not a trick of the light. We didn't sleep that night. Every sound from outside made us jump. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, it all felt wrong. When morning came, he said he needed to go back to see it in daylight. I didn't want to, but I went. We drove back around noon. The desert looked the same, bright, harmless, ordinary. It almost made me laugh how normal it all appeared. We walked to the top of the hill where he said it stood. That's when we saw the prints. They weren't human. They weren't animal. Elongated impressions, 18 inches long, 6 wide, deep into the hard soil. Only 3 of them. Like something impossibly heavy had taken 3 deliberate steps and stopped. The stride length was over 6 feet. My brother took photos, hands shaking. We didn't talk. We just left. He moved to California within a month. Said he couldn't live near the desert anymore. I stayed for a while, but something in me had changed. I stopped going out to quiet places. Even the sound of wind through the trees made me uneasy. Started researching. I read about the Mogollon Monster Arizona's Bigfoot. People claimed it was huge, a plike, dark-haired, human-shaped, but distorted. But none of those stories mentioned the silence, that absolute, crushing void before it appears. That wasn't animal instinct. That was something else. I talked to forest workers, biologists, anyone who'd listen. They all said the same thing. Nature doesn't go completely silent unless a predator is nearby, and, even then, it's localized. What we experienced stretched for miles. It was as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Even now, 2 decades later, I can close my eyes and feel that same pressure in my ears, that same bone-deep stillness. Sometimes I dream of it. The tone, the silence, the shadow standing tall against the horizon. I wonder how many others have seen it. How many others didn't make it back? Because the desert is vast, endless. There are places out there where things can watch without ever being seen. And I know this much: whatever was on that hill, it's still out there, waiting. Would you dare return to that place? The first time Jalen mentioned 2 guns, I felt an ache deep in my gut, an instinctive pull of warning I couldn't explain. She laughed when I told her that, said I'd been reading too many ghost stories. But even before we set foot there, the place had already crept into my dreams. Broken gas pumps buried in sand, a cave that breathed like a living thing, and a voice whispering my name through the static of my mind. I should have listened to those dreams. Jalen and I had been exploring ghost towns for years, tracing the dying heartbeats of forgotten places across Arizona and New Mexico. She was the researcher, meticulous, patient, always chasing the truth buried under dust and folklore. I was the photographer, capturing what was left behind before the desert reclaimed it all. Together we made a strange kind of harmony, chasing echoes where most people feared to go. But to Guns was different. Everyone said so. It sat 30 miles east of Flagstaff, right on the edge of Canyon Diablo, a name that should have been enough of a warning. The town was nothing more than a skeleton now. Crumbling stone walls, rusted cars, empty cages from a zoo long abandoned. And beneath it all, a cave where, over a century ago, dozens of Apache were trapped and burned alive by Navajo warriors. Their bones had been displayed for tourists in the 1920s, sold as souvenirs along Route 66. A massacre turned into a roadside attraction. Even after decades, the place still reeked of something unhealed. When Jalen told me she wanted to explore it, I refused at first. She brushed it off, saying we weren't exploiting the dead, we were remembering them. That made sense to her, and maybe that's why I went along. We left Flagstaff early one March morning, cold air biting our fingers as the sun clawed over the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, that hollow emptiness where even sounds seemed afraid to linger. When we pulled off the highway, the ruins loomed like a mirage of stone and rust. The wind carried a low hum through the hollow gas station frames, almost like voices murmuring just out of reach. I tried to laugh it off, but Jalen was already halfway across the cracked pavement. Camera in hand, her boots crunching over the gravel. The cave entrance sat behind a fence of bent chain link and faded warning signs. Danger, stable rock, mountain lions. None of it stopped her. The opening was small, 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, and the air that seeped out was colder than the desert should have allowed. We ducked inside, flashlights cutting through the dark. The smell hit me first, old earth and rot. The beam of my light caught on scattered bones, some animal, some not. Jalen muttered something about the site being historically significant, her voice reverent, almost gentle. She started mapping the cave, sketching the walls while I took photographs. Though each flash seemed to swallow the dark only for a heartbeat before it returned, thicker than before. 15 minutes in, Jalen found a narrow passageway branching off from the main chamber. It was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. I told her it was too risky. She smiled, the beam of her light bouncing against the stone. "Just a quick look," she said. For the record, I followed because I couldn't let her go alone. The air grew tighter, the walls closing in until our shoulders brushed rough stone. When we finally emerged into the second chamber, the cold was unbearable, the kind that felt alive. My breath came out in visible bursts, trembling. The light revealed ancient markings carved into the wall, symbols I didn't recognize, faded yet deliberate. Jalen stepped forward slowly, her eyes fixed on them. Something about her changed. Her face slackened. Her breathing slowed until it almost stopped. She whispered something I couldn't understand, a low chant, in a language that didn't belong in this world. I reached for her shoulder, and the instant my hand brushed her, she flinched violently. Turning to me with eyes that looked hollow, emptied of everything I knew, she didn't blink. She didn't seem to see me at all. I shouted her name, nothing. The sound barely carried in the heavy air. My chest tightened, as if the darkness itself were pressing inward. She started to move deeper into the chamber, her light trembling in her hand. I grabbed her arm and yanked her back toward the narrow passage. For a moment she resisted, her body jerking against mine with unnatural strength. But I didn't stop until we stumbled back into the main cave. As soon as her boots hit the uneven floor, it was like a switch flipped. She blinked, gasping, her confusion genuine.
What's wrong?
She asked. I told her everything, what she'd said, how she'd looked, but she just shook her head. Said she didn't remember any of it. We left the cave right then, sunlight stabbing our eyes as we stepped outside. Our hands wouldn't stop shaking. Jalen brushed dust from her jacket. Calm, again, to calm. You overreacted, she said, laughing softly. But her laughter didn't sound like hers anymore. We argued beside the ruins. She wanted to finish her work. I wanted to leave. She said I was letting fear control me. I said she was tempting something that didn't want to be disturbed. She told me I could wait in the car if I was that scared, and she walked away. I watched her go, the wind howling through the empty zoo cages like something crying. Then silence swallowed everything. I sat in the car for nearly 30 minutes, eyes locked on her distant shape as she moved among the ruins. She stopped by the old gas station, crouched near the fallen walls, then crossed toward the broken trading post. Her camera flashed a few times, bright bursts against the gray daylight. Then she disappeared behind one of the larger structures and didn't reappear. At first I waited, told myself she'd just gone behind the wall, maybe checking angles. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. The sun had started to dip lower, the shadows stretching across the ground like they were reaching for me. I called her name. My voice came back hollow, echoing off stone. Nothing. I got out of the car and walked into the ruins, the crunch of gravel too loud in the silence. Her footprints led toward the trading post. And that's where I found her camera lying face down in the dirt, the lens cracked. The last photo I could see on the screen was a blur of stone and darkness. No sign of her. I called her name again, louder this time. The wind answered, dry and cold. There were no tracks leading away, just that same old sand shifting underfoot, covering everything. I searched until sunset painted the ruins blood red, then called 911. Search and rescue came fast. For 2 weeks they combed every inch of that place, drones, dogs, even radar. They found nothing, no body, no clothing, no signs she'd fallen or fled. She was simply gone. They asked me the same questions over and over. Did we fight? Was she planning to leave? Did I hurt her? Said no. Every time, no. But the more I said it, the less anyone seemed to believe me. Eventually, they stopped asking. Her case went cold, another missing person swallowed by the desert. I went back 3 times after that. Each time the ruins seemed smaller, like the desert was slowly reclaiming them. On the 3rd visit, I found her camera again, still sitting in evidence storage. The police had let me take it when the case was closed. I downloaded the memory card. Most of the photos were what you'd expect: abandoned buildings, animal cages, the highway. But the last 6 stopped me cold. They were taken inside that second chamber, the one she'd found at the end of the narrow passage. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. But in the background, behind her flashlight beam, there was something else. At first, it looked like a shadow, but with each picture it drew closer. In the first photo, it stood far back, a shape in the dark. In the second, it was nearer. By the 6th, it was right behind her. The angle of the final photo was low, as if the camera had been dropped. The timestamp said all 6 were taken within 2 minutes, the same 2 minutes she'd gone silent inside the cave. I showed the photos to the police. They said it was a trick of light. I showed them to paranormal investigators. They told me what I already feared. She'd awakened something ancient, something that remembered. I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe she got lost in the desert. Maybe the curse took her. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear her whispering those same sounds she made in that cave, the ones I couldn't understand. Last week I dreamed I was back there. Cave mouth yawned open before me, breathing out that same cold air. Inside, something moved just beyond the reach of my light. And then, in the dark, I heard her voice soft, pleading, calling my name. I woke up shaking, but my phone was still recording. I hadn't started it. Yet when I played the file, there was something there. Not my breathing, not my voice, just the faint sound of footsteps and gravel, and her whisper. It said, "You shouldn't have left me there." I don't go near Route 66 anymore. I know 2 Guns is still out there, waiting in its silence. The curse hasn't faded, it's only hungry. And sometimes, when the wind blows from the east, I swear I can hear it carrying her name. Would you dare go back? I should have known better than to stay alone in Morton Hall over winter break. The moment the snow began to fall outside my window, a strange stillness crept in, heavy and deliberate, like the air itself was holding its breath. My family had moved to Texas, and I couldn't afford to fly out of Arizona for just a few weeks. So I told myself it would be fine, quiet, peaceful even. I was wrong. Morton Hall wasn't built for silence. The building was nearly a century old. One of Northern Arizona University's oldest dorms, its tall brick facade and narrow windows swallowing more light than they reflected. Inside, the radiators hissed and clanged like old bones shifting under the floorboards. At first, it felt charming, the kind of vintage discomfort that made the campus feel historic, almost alive. But by the fourth night, I realized alive wasn't quite the right word. Everyone at No knew the story. Kathy, a freshman from the 1950s who never left. She'd stayed behind one winter break, heartbroken after her boyfriend died in the Korean War, and her family couldn't pay her tuition. They found her in the stairwell between the second and third floors, hanging, cold, forgotten until students returned in January. When Ara Talon told us the story at the first floor meeting, she laughed it off as local lore, something to spook new residents. She said, "As long as you don't bother her, Kathy won't bother you." Back then, I smiled. But when the building emptied for winter break, her words looped through my head like a warning I hadn't taken seriously enough. There were only 5 of us left in the entire dorm. Morton Hall could house 200, so the emptiness was almost physical. The sound of my own footsteps echoed down the hallway longer than it should have. My room on the 3rd floor was small but cozy. The radiator hissed. The wind slipped through the imperfect window seals, and I convinced myself it was all normal. Until the night, my television flickered on by itself. It was around 10. I was studying when the static bloomed suddenly across the screen, lighting up the dark room. The remote sat untouched on my nightstand. I turned it off, unsettled but calm. Then it happened again. An hour later, same burst of static, same flicker of white noise. I unplugged it this time and tried to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, my poster had fallen to the floor, not ripped, not knocked down. The tacks were still perfectly pinned into the wall, as if invisible hands had lifted it and set it down with care. I told myself the air had shifted, that maybe the heating was making the walls expand. But deep down, I knew something else was happening. By Christmas Eve, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went to visit Indiana, another student staying over break, down on the 2nd floor. We watched a movie together to keep things light, but halfway through, we heard its low, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. We muted the sound. The steps came closer, passing right by her door. We exchanged glances. There were only 5 of us in the entire building, and we knew where everyone's rooms were. The footsteps came from the wrong end of the corridor, the end that should have been completely empty. We opened the door. As the hallway stretched out in sterile fluorescent light, every corner visible. Nothing, but the footsteps didn't stop. They echoed faintly now, climbing the stairwell. Indiana whispered, "Let's check." I wanted to say no, but fear has a strange pull. It makes you follow the thing you're most afraid of, as if understanding it might save you. We entered the stairwell. The sound stopped. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and my breath fogged before me, and then I saw her. A dark silhouette suspended in the air between the 2nd and 3rd floors. A woman's shape, head tilted to the side at an impossible angle, feet just above the step. For a heartbeat, I thought my mind was filling in shadows, but Indiana saw it too. We stood frozen, the silence louder than any scream. Then, in the blink of an eye, the shape was gone. The warmth returned as suddenly as it had left. Indiana grabbed my hand, trembling, and we ran, neither of us stopping until we were back in her room with the door locked and the lights on. We didn't speak for a long time. When I finally tried to sleep that night, the image replayed behind my eyelids over and over. The outline of her body, the tilt of her head, the cold in my lungs. Then silence swallowed everything. Christmas morning came and went without a sound. I spent most of the day in my room, pretending to study, pretending not to listen for footsteps. The daylight made Morton Hall seem normal again, almost kind, but nightfall brought the cold back with it. I tried to sleep early, though every creak in the hallway made my pulse jump. Around midnight, the blankets began to move. At first I thought I'd kicked them off in my sleep, but then I felt it a slow, steady tug from the foot of the bed. I froze, gripping the fabric tighter. The pull stopped. I waited. 10 minutes later, it happened again. I sat up fast, heart pounding. No one was there. But the feeling in the room had shifted, thick and watchful. I turned on every light. The shadows retreated but didn't vanish. I dragged my desk chair against the door, locked it twice, and sat on the bed until sunrise. When I finally dared to look, I saw them 3 long scratches carved down the inside of my door, as they hadn't been there before. I went straight to Talon's room on the 1st floor. She listened quietly as I told her everything: the TV, the footsteps, the stairwell, the scratches. When I finished, she didn't laugh or dismiss it. She just said softly, "It's always worse during winter break. That's when she's most active." She helped me move into a smaller first-floor room that afternoon. I thought being closer to someone else would help. It didn't. That night, Indiana texted me at 2 in the morning. "Someone's knocking on my door," she wrote, "but no one's there." Another student said she heard crying coming from the walls. Talon said her doorknob had turned on its own for 10 minutes straight, and then it was my turn. Woke up to a presence in the room. I didn't hear anything, just felt it, like the air itself was being displaced. I opened my eyes, and there she was. A woman standing at the foot of my bed, her long hair draped over her face, white gown swaying slightly as if underwater. She didn't move, didn't breathe. My throat locked.
Ow.
No scream came out. Then she lifted her head, where her face should have been. There was only blackness and absence that seemed to devour the dim light around it. My voice finally broke free, a raw, terrified sound that barely felt like mine. In an instant, she was gone. The door burst open and Talon ran in, her face pale as snow. We left the next morning. All 5 of us checked into a cheap downtown hotel, crammed into 2 rooms. No one slept much. We agreed not to talk about it. But when I returned weeks later for spring semester, I found my old poster lying on the floor again. And written across my mirror in faint condensation were 3 words: "Stay away, Kathy." I moved out that day. Indiana stayed. She said she wasn't afraid anymore, that maybe Kathy just needed someone who understood her loneliness. 2 weeks later, she came to my new dorm, eyes wide, hands shaking. She told me that on New Year's Eve, she'd heard a knock at her door. She opened it. No one was there, just a folded note slid under the threshold. It read, "Thank you for keeping me company. I'm not alone anymore." Indiana said she researched old newspaper clippings. Kathy hadn't been entirely alone the night she died. Another girl had been in the building, one who'd found her body later. Her name had also been Indiana. After that night, the activity in Morton Hall stopped. No more footsteps. No more crying. No more cold spots. My friends said Kathy had finally found peace. Because every night for weeks, when I tried to sleep in my new dorm, I'd hear something faint, just barely audible through the quiet. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps moving down an empty hallway. Would you dare return to Morton Hall?